Good evening. I'm Pam Horn, Director of Cross-Platform Publishing and Strategic Partnerships at Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Thanks for being here. So pleased you're with us for this evening's design talk, inspired by our current exhibition, By the People, Designing a Better America. The exhibition is the third in Cooper Hewitt's series of groundbreaking exhibitions dedicated to socially responsible design that we first launched in 2007. Our curator of socially responsible design, Cynthia Smith, an expert in the field with an international following, crisscrossed the United States researching design's responses to the country's continuing crisis of social and economic inequality. The 60 innovative and responsive designs installed throughout the museum are the results of designers engaging and collaborating with community stakeholders to address the complex and systemic issues at the local level with the intention of provoking change and creating opportunity. Collectively, they deliver a powerful message of optimism for a better America, as well as assurance that design has been and always will be committed to social progress. If you have not yet seen By the People, I urge you to return to Cooper Hewitt very soon, because the exhibition closes in just a few short weeks on February 26th. I love what a recent visitor wrote in her Instagram account about her experience of By the People. Quote, "It was a beautiful message of optimism for achieving a more equitable and sustainable future for all of America through design. These kind of stories and powerful messages are just what America needs right now." Several of the designs in By the People emerged from the digital realm, where extraordinary advances in information sharing have been made in the last few decades. And the sheer amount of unique data produced each year is expanding almost exponentially. With us this evening are three digital pioneers, designers whose work demonstrates how information design can empower communities and enrich civic life. Sarah Williams is an assistant professor of urban planning and the director of the Civic Data Design Lab at MIT's School of Architecture and Planning. The Civic Data Design Lab works with data maps and mobile technologies to develop interactive design and communication strategies that bring urban policy issues to broader audiences. The Civic Data Design Lab created the educational City Digits project, which helps school students learn math by examining urban injustices in their own New York City neighborhood, and is now on view in the exhibition. Tiffany Chu is a co-founder of Remix, which builds software to help cities better plan public transit. She was Zipcar's first UX designer and then became a fellow at Code for America, where she worked with local governments to improve technology in the public sector. Remix's digital transit sketch tool is used by more than 50 transportation agencies around the world and is on view in By the People. And Adam Cutler is a design studio program director with IBM Design. He is responsible for IBM Design Studio in Austin, Texas, while advising the other studio directors globally. He is also responsible for the competency, culture, and practices of design and designers at IBM, which was a generous supporter of By the People. Thank you, IBM. Our discussion will be moderated by Cynthia Smith and will be followed by a brief Q&A. Please welcome to the stage Sarah, Tiffany, and Adam.
Hi, everybody. I had a really exciting day in that I taught a big data visualization and society class right before I got on the plane to come here. And this year we're looking at how we can understand the data of the election. So it's been a really fun conversation. I think many of us are interested in understanding how the polls went awry. And so that's one of the things that we did. I think everybody woke up with different statistics. And so I would love to talk about that if you're interested during the panel discussion, some of the interesting conversations we're having at MIT about how data and big data is used in that way. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I am so excited, not just to be talking to you all, but also to be part of this wonderful exhibition, which really thinks about design and how we can use design to impact societal changes. And that's what my research lab is really interested in. I run something called the Civic Data Design Lab at MIT, and our goal is to take data and synthesize it into meaningful designs that we hope can affect policy change. We always hear, this story about how the rise of big data is going to change the world that we live in. But in my research lab, I really feel like big data will not change the world unless it's collected and synthesized into tools that have a public benefit. And the reason I mention that here is, when we're talking about the idea of cognitive computing, there's still somebody behind this big data, training the data, deciding what the models will be, and we are learning from it, but we are also training it. And I think it's important to remember that there are still operators within these kind of computational algorithms. And so, because one of the things that the Civic Data Design Lab does is tell stories with data, I'm going to tell you a small story, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project that I worked on here in Cooper Hewitt. So I am really excited. Just last week, we finished version 2 of a project that I'm working on in Nairobi, Kenya. And this project started from this picture and image. These are matatus. They're the small informal transit vehicles that 3.5 million people depend on in Nairobi. Yet we had no information about their routes and where they went along the way. And I like to give a video. Let's see if it'll play. To show you the culture of a matatu. It's not going to play, actually, I think. Oh, maybe it's going to. Well, we'll skip it. The question was, how can we leverage the ubiquitous nature of cell phone use in Nairobi, Kenya, to capture data about the informal transit system, which most citizens depend upon, and open that data up for anyone to use and build upon? So we have these small matatus. They are the main form of transit. They're very much like a bus system that you would see here in New York or anywhere else. It just operates in a much different way. But people in Nairobi use cell phones for everything. And we actually decided to collect that data in a standardized format, something called GTFS. Does anybody know what GTFS is? Anyone? One person. It's usually one person in the room, and that's my co-presenter. Surprise. But actually, you guys all use GTFS probably today. So GTFS is the underlying data structure in Google Maps, which allows you to route your public transit. So, and so one of the things that we did with the Nairobi data is when we collected it, people went around on their cell phones, collected the matatus going, and they collected in this format so that we could use it for other tools. And I think this video might also fail. That's okay. Because what I was going to show you is what a beautiful text file it creates. But from our data collection, we actually created a map. And this is the Nairobi transit map launched in the paper. And one of the things that we thought was really important is not just to create a data set that can be used in Google Maps and allow people to route their transit, but to actually create a paper map that everybody can use. And I think what was actually really important about the paper map was not just that it gave access to everybody, but actually it became kind of an advocacy tool and a symbol for what the system can provide citizens in Nairobi. I also think what's really important about the visual map versus the data is that we had been talking to the government all along about collecting this data set, and they were largely disinterested. And then when they saw this map, they got very interested. They made it the official map of the city. They printed out copies of it. They made billboards of it. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is when we talk about data, I think it's very abstract to people. What does it actually mean? What can I do with it? And visualizations help to synthesize the power of data into something that everyone can see and use. One thing that I want to talk about is that, we open this data up for anyone to use and build upon, and that's what the GTFS standard allows. And, this is actually a map. Doesn't it look very similar to the map I showed you earlier? This is actually the BRT map that the World Bank created. And so what they're doing is they're leveraging the power. So the Nairobi map now has kind of an iconic association with it. People feel very proud of their city. And so here, when the World Bank was trying to propose bus rapid transit lines, these are kind of dedicated lanes for buses, they use the same graphic to do that. And kind of copying a graphic visual is also really important to support and garner support. I would say that Google leveraged the power of our map as well. So if you go to Nairobi, you can now, it is the first informal transit system, which is navigable on Google Maps because we collected in the system. So it's really important to think about standards of data. And because we had a GTFS standard, we were able to make that data. So really, data visualizations, take the complexity of data and transform that into something everybody can read. And here I'm using an example from the project in the Cooper Hewitt where I actually made a FOIA request for all the lottery data, and I was able to plot that data onto a map, and these green areas show how much people spend on lottery, and the purples show you how much people win. And so we're really taking something that looks like this and making it clear. And that's what's really important about working with data for designers. The City Digits project was really about how can we take data and position it in a particular place and teach people math skills, not just people, youth math skills, because I think one of the most important things right now for youth is teaching data literacy, right? We are more and more making decisions off data, and students need to understand how to read, interpret that. And I think it's going to be a skill just as important as English and math. And, this project was really thinking about how can we teach them mathematics using the city. And we picked lottery data because lottery is everywhere. You see it on the streets. This youth see it in their neighborhood. But also it has a lot of math behind it. And also probability, which I was actually just talking to one of my MIT colleagues, and they said probability is one of the hardest things to teach even people at MIT. It's not something that's intuitive. And so what we did when we decided to pick the lotteries, we thought, where can we get data about the lottery system? And we saw that these maps existed online of all the retailers. And what we actually did is made a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, and we got all of the data for the last 5 years. So that's every ticket sold, whether it's a scratch-off ticket or a mega bonus, double plus plus. There's so many different lottery tickets. And we transformed that data into a digital map, which students could explore the data with. So if you actually go to citydigits.mit.edu, you'll be able to see and actually interact with each bodega and how much they win and how much they sell. And this is something we also looked at the percent of your income that's spent on lottery. And here we're looking at the comparison between Bushwick and Park Slope, where you can see in Bushwick they spend 3% of their income on lottery on average versus a 0.5% in Park Slope. And so the youth can begin to have a conversation about why that is using these maps. We also looked at net gain and net loss between different neighborhoods. So, how much overall does the community win and lose in lottery tickets? And one of the things that this map shows is you most always lose, but the odds is stacked against you. And so the youth use these on digital tablets. These were high school students. There were exercises within the tool that asked them questions to look at the ratios that they were developing in the maps themselves. And we did also workshops to kind of ask them to understand the math behind the maps and to explain that through other kinds of design tools, here using probability tree to understand the probability of winning the lottery. But one of the things that I think is really important when we talk about using data or representing data is that I think you need to ground truth your results. You have to ask people, do you think this is really reality? And so one of the things that we included in the tool is we enabled them to go ask people in the field, be journalists using the tool, and ask people what they thought of the lottery. And so they actually were able to take interviews using their tablets. Those interviews went directly onto the map. As they were doing it, and it allowed us to bring qualitative data into this quantitative analysis. And this is actually the City Digits tool where you can hear everybody's opinion of the lottery. And these are the youth being journalists in the field. And you can see, actually, you could use it on your phone as well. And so some of this youth use their phones to take the interviews. And then ultimately, one of the things that you need to do in order to be data literate is actually interpret results. So we asked the youth to create what we called opinions. Today, this group said, our tour today is about how we despise the Lotto. We feel that the Lotto is a waste of money. And they use data and the maps to make their arguments. And I think to be data literate, you need to make arguments with data. We found that the youth didn't always understand maps. And so we actually created a big map that would allow them to experience the geography of the city as well. So if you're interested in looking at this tool, it's at citydigits.mit.edu. We did one about the lottery, and we also did one about check cashing. But I want to end here because I know I'm way over my time because I told you 2 stories instead of just one. But one of the things that I think is really important when we're thinking about data collection and data analytics is it's part of a whole circular model. You know, we collect the data, we quantify it, we ground truth it, we open it up and we visualize it, and we work with teams, policy experts that know about the data, and they can tell us whether they think that's accurate. And then the loop goes around again, and we create a better model of our data. And one of the things that I think is really important is just as designers kind of work with data iteratively, so do modelers. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about that today. And I just want to leave us with, everybody has their own data. Jane Jacobs had her petitions, and Robert Moses has his quantitative data. And if we don't actually hear those opinions from people, we could create different kinds of outcomes. So I think adding qualitative data, adding the human voice to data visualizations is really important to ensure that we're not taking kind of black box models. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany. I'm Tiffany Chu, a designer and co-founder at Remix, and I honestly can't think of a better way to frame my talk than what Sarah just basically put out on the table. A lot of what I think about every day is how to design with data to empower urban planners, who are the shapers of our cities. And when I asked Cynthia and Susanna what would be the most impactful things I could share with you all today, I think there's three things. Number one, why transit matters and why we as a company were focusing on it today. Number two, a little bit about trajectory and process, hopefully things that you can draw from what we've learned from our experiences and maybe apply to what you guys do. And then number three, of course, design is great, but it's even better when it actually has real, clear, concrete impact. So I'm going to share two stories of impact in cities that we're working in. Okay, so first of all, why does transit matter? So for most of you, you probably live here in New York, so you already know inherently, but for a lot of the audiences that I speak with, I need to explain the concept of why transit is the backbone of our cities. It dictates where people can go, what kind of jobs they can get, what kind of lives they lead, and ultimately what type of growth a city can experience. And it's for these reasons why we actually, as fellows at Code for America in 2014, we started to explore the rich world of transit and transit data. So these are my co-creators, Lizzie, Danny, Dan, and Sam, and we actually all met the first week of our fellowship. By the way, Code for America is a nonprofit in San Francisco, helping and partnering with cities to help them move into the 21st century with regards to technology. And one of the first things that we did was actually engage in a hackathon and to take all this different types of open data and see what we could create out of it. And actually what we created was a little prototype where you can drag and drop a line on a map and suggest better transit routes as citizens to the cities of San Francisco and Oakland. So this is what it looks like. So you can click a button on the upper right-hand side, and a couple things will appear. You'll see a map where you can literally, with your mouse, really simply drag and drop, and immediately you'll notice that the numbers are changing on the right-hand side. So what's happening is that we're calculating how long this transit route is, how much it might cost a city to operate it, and who would potentially ride it, what the access is. And in return, what you would understand is, hey, is this a good investment for my city? So that was the prototype that we made, and we just thought it was really fun because there were so many open source mapping tools coming out into the forefront by Mapbox and MapZen and GTFS that Sarah mentioned. All of those were just really fun things that we wanted to play with. But we launched it online, just kind of quietly tweeting it to our Civic tech friends, being like, hey, we made a thing. And in less than 24 hours, we had gotten about 200 tweets from other city enthusiasts who are really excited to draw transit in their own city. And immediately after that, we got about 10 different articles written up. And then after that, we got about 200 emails sent to our inbox from real planners around the world saying, hey, I want to use this for my city, for my transportation plan coming up. And that was kind of the moment where we took a step back, looked at our overflowing inbox and said, why is this happening? What did we just hit upon? And can we really understand what's at the heart of this underlying response? So what we did was we actually combed through all of our emails and called up the people who emailed us. So we called up Stephen Marks, who actually used to run planning at the New Orleans Regional Transit Authority. He said things like, this is a dream come true for us because we had never had a tool like this before. We talked to Bradley Tollison, who works in Southern California, and he said that he used to do whiteboarding before he had Remix, and now it's better. And we realized there was enough meat here that we wanted to do as much user research as possible so we could figure out what the challenges were that somehow our prototype was attacking that we didn't realize. So we went to the SFMTA, which was across the street at the time, and we talked to the planning department there and asked, hey, how are you doing your planning? We talked to planners in New York. This is David Moss, who is one of the planning managers at the MTA, just down the street. And today, when he wants to plan out new transit routes or detours for communities in the Bronx, he uses graph paper and ballpoint pen. This is Lewis in Austin, and he loves his Sharpie markers and his paper maps. And this is Bradley with his famous whiteboard. And what we realized was that there were all these different pieces of fragmented data that were really necessary to planning good transit, but the tools and the data itself were so disparate and in all these different corners of either the internet or their desktop or just across a huge organization that it was really hard to wield. So ultimately, what we learned was that it was really hard for cities to explain the rationale behind investing in transit as a public service due to these fragmented tools. And so what we did is we actually did even more research. We asked everyone if you could give us, actually, we didn't even ask, they already told us. They gave us probably 10 paragraph emails that said, you need to do all these things to Remix, and then my life would be great. So the first thing was definitely add census data. So that's what we did. We also went in and added all the existing transit routes for a bunch of different cities so that you could immediately, in a couple seconds, upload all of it into a single map, which had never been able to be done before. And in seconds, be able to visualize holistically what does your transit look like for an internal planning platform. So that was huge. And what we started to learn was that there were so many cities that were hungering for this. And I know Pam in the beginning said that we were working in 50 cities, but actually over the last 2 years, we're now working with over 200 cities who are now using Remix as their planning platform. So not just the big ones that I mentioned, but also the small ones across most of America, from Ohio to Athens, Georgia, to Bloomington, Normal, Illinois, all the places where you don't think have transit, but the places where transit is probably the lifeline there for the people who need it the most. So in terms of our trajectory, one of the biggest questions that we ask and keep asking ourselves to this date is, how can we build a platform that would benefit the most number of cities? In a lot of settings, what you could do is you could say, hey, I'm going to go for a model where I work with only one city and go really deep and build everything super custom for that city, and it'll be perfect and great. But in our perspective, in order to have the most possible impact, we wanted to develop a platform that was flexible enough to work with the most number of cities possible. And the way that we did that was by tracking every single piece of feedback that we have ever gotten, either over the phone or by email or visiting them at their offices when we were in town. And it's a little sneak peek into our workflow, but what we do is we actually log all of them on a board. We use Trello. And we have all of these different categories, and if a planner tells us that this XYZ thing needs to be improved, we'll log it under the new column. And if we hear it again, then we'll log it again as a comment. And by the end, you'll be able to step back and see, hey, how many times has this specific feature been asked for, which will lead to how impactful will this feature be if we were to build it. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to prioritize features, but more specifically when we talk about impact, one of the product requests that we got many, many times was, I want to see how far a rider can go on our network. So our question was, using the data that we already have, how can we visualize access and mobility? And so we built this feature called Jane, and Jane is actually named for Jane Jacobs, the urbanist. And what she does is you can actually drop Jane on a remix map, and you can see how far she can travel on the network, just using only transit and walking in 15, 30, 45, and 60 minutes. So I'm going to show you exactly how Jane works through 2 case studies. So the first one I want to talk about is King County Metro up in Seattle, and then the second one is Santa Clara in San Jose, California. So for King County Metro, they had this long-range plan vision for 2040, and they wanted to basically visualize what will transit look like with XYZ level of investment 30 years from now. So I'm actually going to play a video.
Paper maps, Excel sheets, all of that. We have a huge network. We have over 1,400 buses on the road. It's a huge amount of service and routes that we needed to collect. But what did we do differently this time? We were able to build a remix model with the current GTFS speeds, and then with the 2025 and 2040 network, collect detailed information on a route level from individual jurisdictions. They were able to move the route and understand different outcomes and benefits associated with doing that, provide that information to us in a very coordinated way. Also, we were able to use a web-based tool that was very easy to use. Elected officials were able to use it, planners were able to use it, and our stakeholders were able to use it. And I think that was really critical. But what was really important was describing the outcomes, showing and mapping your freedom, your ability to move, and the opportunities you can get to with public transportation. These isochrone maps were critical for our policy leaders. They were able to understand, if I live here, I can only get this far now, but where will I be able to go with a coordinated vision with our regional partners in the future? Very powerful tool. It doesn't matter that you have a bus outside your house, it matters how far you can go. Over 70% of our boardings in 2040 will have transfers. This map is able to capture some of that. This was a very neat way of communicating the access and the freedom to move that a lot of our politicians were very interested in.
So this is a really fascinating case study for us because, well, first of all, we had never worked with such a big city before, and we never had done a long-range plan. And what we realized was that with something new like this, it took a third of the time to build consensus amongst 39 different municipalities. So instead of just a planning platform, it was really a translation for policymakers who were not planners by trade, but they had to make big decisions about planning for their communities. There's a other couple of impacts here, but I think what's most important was that the long-range plan was actually adopted officially on January 23rd, which was just a few weeks ago, and we're really excited to see what Seattle's going to bring. So I'm going to quickly go through this one, and then I'm gonna skedaddle. But I want to talk briefly about the big struggle that San Jose is having with investment in transit specifically. So I think there's always a big tension between investing in high ridership routes, which require high frequency and high density, and also coverage routes, which are usually lower frequency, go to more places, but it's basically saying you want to provide some coverage to as many places as possible. So this is a big debate in transit planning right now, how much of transit agencies' budget should go to ridership routes, which are high frequency, and coverage routes, which are lower frequency but cover more of the service area and maybe serve more people as a result. So VTA's has 3 different scenarios: a network 70, a network 80, and a network 90 vision. And today, this is what their network looks like if you were to go to San Jose. If Jane were to live right there near, I think, one of the community colleges, this is how far she could get. And I actually had the privilege of attending one of their public board meetings in April of last year and watched how data in action helped to actually sway the board from a decision-making process. So this is Jarrett Walker, a transit consultant, advising the board and presenting the data on how they should make a decision about what type of investment to put forward.
The ways where she could get through 15, the next colors out are 30, 45, the pink is where she could get through in 60 minutes. That's what she can do right now in your current network. Here's what it would be in network in concept 70. Already, even in concept 70, much better. A lot of that's the effect of the Tasman Expressway red line that appears with when BART opens. But also because of some other improvements we've been able to make even in that scenario. Here's kind of what happens then if we go to 80. And here's what happens if we go to 90. Existing 70, 80, 90. This diagram is a map of liberty and opportunity. It is a map of where you can go, which is what you can do and what choices you have in life. But it also happens to track very well with how we increase ridership, which is that we increase ridership by giving more people more places they can get to.
So that was last year, and I'm excited to share that after the first round of public engagement, 2/3 of the folks in Santa Clara County actually want to move in the direction of high ridership routes. So we'll see more towards the end of this year how this project is going to shake out. So I have 3 takeaways that I want to leave with you. The first one is not all of us are planners or can be planners, but I think there are different ways that we can all use data to empower the planner in their day-to-day jobs and thus improving cities. Number 2, I think this is also very much highlighted by Sarah as well, but data by itself can be, convincing to a point, but it's literally the visual stories paired with the data that get people to understand why. And then finally, when enough people understand the why, policy change can happen. So I'm going to say thank you, and this is my contact info if you want to reach out.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. I'm Adam Cutler. I'm a distinguished designer at IBM. I was appointed as a distinguished designer last April, and the mission that was given to me was to define what it meant to design for cognitive computing. And as the previous 2 speakers have highlighted, data is everything. And this, what you're about to see, is as much a culmination of my research for the past few months as it is an understanding of what we can do with data once it's transformed. So the impact of artificial intelligence and cognitive computing creates a new tension between ourselves and our environment. And the need for human-centered design to calm this tension is greater now more than ever. To define it simply, a cognitive system must be able to understand, it must be able to reason, and it must be able to learn. For these are the pillars of cognition. We, in moving to a system that has the capability to understand, reason, and learn, means that we have shifted from transactional-based computing to relationship-based computing. And this is a fundamentally different way to think about how we design for these types of experiences. Changes everything. So what we have to start asking ourselves is, what does this mean to design for relationships, for the context within those relationships, and how do you design for conversations around the data that's feeding these systems? So We have 3 principles that we hold true about cognitive computing across the entire company. First, it is meant to augment human intelligence, not replace human intelligence. Second is that we provide human confidence through transparency. And third is that we provide, and we will provide, the skills and knowledge to engage in a relationship with cognitive systems. So I just said a whole bunch, and what I found when I first started learning about all of this is that it was really helpful to level set everybody simply on what cognitive is, what cognitive computing is, what design is, and what I think cognitive design will be. So first is cognitive, straight out of the dictionary, is related to or involving the human thought process. Cognitive computing is the simulation of a human thought process in a computerized model for the benefit of augmenting human capabilities. Design is the purpose, planning, or intention behind an action, fact, or material object. Therefore, cognitive design is the purpose, planning, or intent behind simulated human thought processes. It also helps to understand a little bit how cognitive computing works. So this is a very basic overview, but as we've been talking about this evening, nothing happens without your data. So there's 3 different places that data comes from. One is the data that you possess. This comes in the form of customer records, transactional systems, predictive models, etc. There's data that occurs outside of your firewall. That's news, events, geospatial, and that sort of thing. And then there's data that's coming. Some of it's already here, but a lot of it's on the way. Internet of Things, sensory data, audio, video, and imagery. And if you see along the bottom, it goes from structured and active to unstructured and dark. And 88% of the data that we've created to date is over here in the unstructured and dark area, which means we don't even know what we don't know about the data that's out there. The way that a cognitive system works is that you feed your data into this cognitive system, and the first thing that the system does is it understands this. And what that means is that it is able to rapidly, astonishingly fast, volume and quantity and quality of the data that's going in. So it can be structured or unstructured. You just dump it in. The system sifts through this based on a model. The model, once it's gone through the understanding process, goes through a reasoning process, and that allows the system to start creating hypotheses upon which this, how the understood data set can be applied to human problems. And then last, it is learning from these 2 processes in order to place together what it is synthesized. Therefore, it interacts with a human being, and in that process, it learns from those processes and feeds it back into the understanding and reasoning system. So how do you design for cognitive? First, you have to determine value. Second is establishing human and system context. Third is leveraging cognitive system traits. And fourth is adapting for core cognitive experiences. So first, starting with value is out there right now is there are tons of cognitive services that are at the atomic level. These are things like natural language processing, speech to text, things like that. They are easily acquired, but the end value to the user is not that high. As you start to aggregate these services together, where you pair natural language processing and retrieve and rank to get better results, the value increases. But what's really critical here is when you start driving towards insight, when you can start pulling something out of the data that was previously unstructured or dark to you. And most valuable is that if you can provide an action that the human can take or that the system can take on the behalf of the human, this provides the most value out of a data set that is structured or unstructured in a way that we have not been able to make use of so far. There's also use cases that are really suited well for cognitive. First is engagement, in which the system acts as an expert assistant to the human user. Second is exploration, which collects the information that you need to be successful so that you can explore your problem area better. Third is discovery, which allows us to find the possibilities around the outside of the data sets that we probably wouldn't be able to find even with the most brilliant human beings alone. There is decision, which offers evidence options and reduces human bias. And then the last is policy, which allows us to establish a lineage between previous successes and failures against written policy conditions. Next is establishing user and system contexts. First is a human context. And again, if you are a practicing designer, human context should be second nature. However, this is not something that people think about consciously when diving into this type of work. So the first human context is the emotional context. There's positive and negative, things like excitement, happiness, and serenity on the positive end of things, and stress, nervousness, and depression on the other side. And it's really important for us as designers to be conscious of how the user will be predisposed in their everyday usage of this. So it might be that they're excited to be at work, or they may be in a perilous situation, which brings me to the physical context. And that is, are they seated or mobile? Are they comfortable or uncomfortable? Is the scale of their space important to them and how it works? These all must be considered when putting the system, the experience together for a cognitive system. And then there's the social context. The social context is based on how the norms of the group behave in any given situation. So the point of these two images are, you wouldn't behave the way that you would at a sporting event as you would in church, and vice versa, or at an opera in this case. Being aware of how people will use your system, use your experience when with others is critical to be able to center how you deliver this in a way that makes sense for it to be natural. Then there are the system contexts, the first being spotlight context, and this is where a cognitive system takes the forefront of an experience. This is Chef Watson that we created with Bon Appetit. If you take Chef Watson or Watson out of the mix, this becomes, it reverts back to Bon Appetit's recipes. What Watson brings to this is a recombination of the ingredients and the taste profiles for cooks, both professional and home, to be able to experiment based on the suggestions that the system makes to it, to the user. There's the companion context, and the companion context comes in two different varieties. The first is an assistant. Everybody's familiar with something like Siri or OK Google, in which the assistant is called forward to do what you ask, and then it recedes into the background. And then there's the coach, like we have with the H&R Block and Watson application, in which the focus is placed on the tax preparer and the client, and Watson acts as a coach in the middle, coaching both the preparer and the client. And then there's ambient. And ambient is critical in that I think many starter cognitive solutions are going to be of this nature. And the reason being is that while we have a bit of conversational interface up at the top, there are going to be plenty of systems that we are used to seeing visualized in the same way that we have every day before it. It's just that these displays will be infinitely more intelligent than they have been in the past. So rather than being fed by a database, they're going to be fed by an intelligent system. Okay, so after we've established the context and determined value, leveraging the cognitive system traits. So in order for a system to be considered cognitive, it must be adaptive. And adaptive means that it can roll with whatever the user gives it. So it's constantly adjusting. Regardless of how a user twists and turns through this natural interaction, the system can remember and understand by being stateful. And we have to be cognizant in designing to each one of these. It's not the same thing as lining pixels on a grid anymore. This is about making sure that what you have to offer can be adapted by the system, that it can be remembered so that it can be recalled maybe sometimes a month later, maybe a week later, that it's natural so that it must be easy for the end user to use. And that means that it can't be done using lines of code. It has to be leveraged, it has to leverage speech or typing. That it's transparent, that the system has the ability to show its math so that we always have confidence that we can understand how a system arrived at its purpose. And then agency, the degree to which a human cognitive system operates without human command. And how much do we actually want of that? And then adapting for core cognitive experiences. So the first is training, and there's a pre-training or a training that goes on when the data is actually fed in, as Tiffany was saying earlier, and that this is done by experts who train a system and a corpus up to running speed. This training is the training that we do as end users, so that as we're interacting with a cognitive system, if it can ask us questions like, did I help you? Did I get this close? Was I right? And we have the ability to say, no, you weren't, or yes, but there's actually a slight angle to this, that we have the ability to communicate back, not using the system for the sake of using the system, but to train it. Second are pre-canned responses. So this is a point-and-click response where it may be a this or that or this option, but these are different in that they are surfaced intelligently, so it's about how they're written and how they're exposed. And then there's a full conversational experience to this where with a trained conversation engine, like Watson Conversation, a cognitive system can have that intelligent conversation with an end user back and forth, letting the conversation go where it needs to go and surfacing what needs to be surfaced at the right time. And then there are avatars, which might be two-dimensional, three-dimensional, but it is a representation of the system itself that allows it to make itself physically understood and known. So in some cases, this might be a robot. In other cases, it might be a 2D avatar that's on screen. Being cognizant of designing to these traits is critical, and the experiences are critical, because what's really important here is designing for relationships. And this is the Knapp relationship escalation model. And this goes back to the 30s when Knapp created this as a part of his social psychology work. I don't know that many of us actually consciously think about how we form relationships, and yet this is how they map out. And what I really want to focus us on is the left half of this, where we are coming together and then that relational maintenance. The initiating, the experimenting, intensifying, and integrating, and bonding. These are all critical for us as human beings, but what does it mean when we are forming these relationships with a system? And that means we have to be very intentional about how we create the conversation, the tone, the way that the information is being delivered back through the cognitive system, so that we can intentionally create these moments for a human to have with a system. There are implications that go with this. First is behavioral migration. Very quickly, I want you to cross your arms the way that you always cross your arms. Now, I want you to cross them the other way. And for some people, they can go right to it. And for others, it's a little bit awkward. This is similar to what we're going to have to ask people after years and years of transactional computing, where we see a field, we see a button that says submit at the end. We've learned to make our Google foo work in our own way so that we can search the way that we need to, where we type in a seemingly random set of words and operators and hit search, and we get back what we expect within the first 2 pages. A cognitive system requires us to have full conversation so that it can derive context out of what it is that we ask. So part of our job as designers is going to have to be, how do we migrate people's currently learned behavior towards something new? Second are biases, and this goes in both directions. Clearly, we don't want any biases going into any system while they're being created. But from a design perspective, we will also see situations where experts are biased, and they will have their bias exposed by a system like this. And it is, how do we reveal that there is bias with grace in a way that allows the human in the equation to work through this, even if they're challenging some deep-seated beliefs about how they do their job or how they approach a problem. And then there's the uncanny valley, especially as it relates to emotion. As designers, we are constantly manipulating the elements that we are given to be able to evoke some kind of emotional response, whether it is the simple aha or a deeper understanding. And it is with the capability of conversational UIs to be able to be written in a way to deliver certain tones, to have a certain personality. When the system hits a moment where it doesn't know what it's supposed to do, if the response comes back wooden or off kilter from what the rest of the experience is, we hit this moment where it doesn't feel real and the illusion is broken. And we have to be very cognizant of this, because this is part of how we form a long-lasting relationship. And everybody's had a frustrating moment with Siri or OK Google, something like that. The three things I'll leave you with is this is a burgeoning and fledgling field, and the important thing is that as designers that we're keeping these three items in sight at all times for a minimum viable interaction. And that is, one, to determine that value for the end user. If we're not providing value for the end user, then it doesn't really matter what we do after. People will walk away from it. Second is that we establish a clear system context so that I know what to expect out of the system as I'm using it. And the third is to create that foundation for the relationship, because these systems grow and learn over time. And the most important thing is that as their capabilities are lower on the totem pole, that they might be considered as toddlers. They must be taught, they must learn from us as we learn from them, and that as their skill levels are low and we work with them, this relationship is going to be what causes us to stick with them over the course of time in order to grow this. Thank you for your time.
This is terrific. Thank you all. Very illuminating. As Pam said before, my name is Cynthia Smith. I'm the Curator of Socially Responsible Design here at Cooper Hewitt, and the Curator of By the People, Designing a Better America. It's currently on display upstairs on the 3rd floor. It's going to close at the end of this month, so if you didn't get to see it tonight before the program, please come back. We would love for you to see it. It includes designs from around the United States, including Remix and City Digits, and addresses complex issues of social and spatial inequalities. I'm looking at my watch. I think we have about 15 minutes that we can have some Q&A here, conversation here, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for about 10 minutes. So get your questions ready. Thank you all for sharing your depth of experience and innovative, multifaceted design approaches. I'm a big fan of all of your work, so let's jump right in. Each of you use data and technology in different ways, designing and developing alternative approaches. What are the key questions you ask before you begin? And tell us a little bit about your design process, who your collaborators are, and how civic engagement has informed your work. You can answer all of those or one of those. It's a lot. You want to start?
I'll start because this is something I think about a lot. So first, kind of design process, right? I think the last slide in my presentation kind of talks about my design process is that often a project that I'm working on, I want to answer a question, whether it's the matatus or kind of understand how laddering affects different places. And, I start with data collection, and sometimes that data collection happens on the ground through cell phones, or sometimes it's a FOIA request. And then I talk to policy experts in the field that I'm working with. And sometimes I'm somewhat knowledgeable, but I think there's lots of people that are more knowledgeable than myself. And what are the key issues and what are the things that we need to communicate most? And then I start thinking about how do I want to communicate that issue? And in both projects, and I'm going to focus on the design, just because we're all designers here, hopefully. With the Nairobi project, I really thought about people in Nairobi are really proud of their matatu system, and they talk about their matatu system much the same way that we talk about the subway. It's like a love-hate relationship, but putting the data into a formalized map, much the way you would see in New York or Paris, was really an important component to the design in order to garner support for the system, to help people see it as one formalized system, but also to create pride about the system. I mean, people now wear T-shirts with the map and all kinds of other things. So having kind of a connection to these larger transport systems and using a style was really important to the work. I don't want to take over because I have so much to say about this, but the last thing I'll just say is that one of the things that I do with all the projects is have the community help me edit my designs, and so that happened with Nairobi. Does this make sense for the way that you guys navigate? There were read maps or within the cultural context, and I did that also with City Digits, using really colors and different kinds of design tools that made sense to the youth that working with the data.
I'll answer the question around design process and collaborators. So obviously what I showed today is not something that I did by myself. I actually have a team of 35 back in San Francisco. And it's a bunch of designers, software engineers, urbanists, planners who really care about this stuff. And I think our design philosophy, if it had to be summed up in one word, it would be focus. And the reason why is we are a product company. We build a product, a platform that supports real life users every day around the world. And if we were to do every single thing and build every single thing that was asked of us by our cities, we would be designing by committee. We would have this complete bloated software platform that would be just completely difficult to use because everyone had a voice in whatever 5,000 buttons that now appear. And so when it comes down to the end of the day, what we as designers must do is to choose and to say no. So I would say that's probably our guiding principle.
I'll take the process question as well. So we use design thinking an awful lot. As I started, I went through just trying to open my eyes to as much as I didn't understand. I think the thing that I dealt with the most was I knew enough to be dangerous around cognitive computing, but not enough to really go deep with it. And so what I did was I started reaching out to people all across the company, IBM fellows, distinguished engineers, and others who had a deeper knowledge base than I did, and I started cataloging as much as I could. And then by diverging and converging around key central themes, which I'm still trying to narrow down because there's so much to explain and so much to understand in a new space, to start developing these theses. So for me, this is a different type of design process where I'm designing more with words this time than I am with broad pictures and screens. It's more about designing ideas. So I'm still figuring that out. I'm a little...
Cognitively.
Yeah, cognitively. I'm very cultish right now.
Well, if we're talking about cities tonight, Jane Jacobs lives on in your wonderful, what is it called, an isochrone?
Isochrone.
An isochrone.
Yes.
And also, you showed her at the end, and you talked about qualitative data. What would Jane say about cognitive computing today, do you think? Do you have any... Oh,
you're asking me? I think in some respects it would be like an amazing new tool set which she could take all of those great ideas that she has had and apply them in new ways. I think the most interesting thing about cognitive to me is that the rapid assimilation of the structured and unstructured to be able to make sense out of that is going to give people like these two, just amazing opportunities to take what they already have and go much further, faster with it.
And that, so Sarah and Tiffany, do you see ways that this pioneering work that IBM is doing with cognitive computing might inform what you're currently or future work?
I mean, already in some of the work that I do, we do some of the other projects in the lab. We use some machine learning tools and which are related to cognitive computing, and so we're already doing that. And one of the things that we use it most for is to interpret kind of social media data, which is just messy. It's opinionated. It has lots of words used in different kinds of contexts and ways, and cognitive computing is really important to kind of make sense of it. And I guess for me, I think where, my work is about having the voice of the citizens heard, I'm really trying to see if I can use some of the cognitive computing techniques to bring out this qualitative data. So this is where I would answer both questions. I think Jane would say, if we hear the voice of the citizen, then I'm all for cognitive computing. And so that's what I'm trying to do with that.
Yeah, I think in our work we see actually a ton of attention being placed on public engagement in terms of, hey, asking the community, what do you want to see? What do you think of this plan? Do you have any feedback? And that entire outreach process. So recently we were helping the city of Anchorage and their transit system collect feedback on a couple of, I think 2 different scenarios actually on their website for the future of their transit system. And what poured in was, I think, close to over 1,000. I didn't even know there were even 1,000 people living in Anchorage, but 1,000 comments just really passionate about whether or not this route should go by their house or the hospital and whatnot. And the poor planner was sitting there looking at these 1,000 comments and not quite knowing what to do. So maybe that would be an opportunity for taking some cognitive computing principles and translating, a bunch of qualitative data, a bunch of words, a bunch of spoken data, and distilling it into, a recommendation, not a law or a rule or a hard and fast policy, but make recommendations that then humans can process and use local knowledge to make a decision on.
Great. And so, there's been a lot of conversation going on. I know when we were talking before, IBM also used the term augmented intelligence too, rather than just artificial intelligence or AI, right? So augmented intelligence will soon impact every aspect of our lives, we're told. I'd be curious to see if you all agree with that. And currently, MIT and Harvard have formed an AI for Public Interest initiative. And they're exploring questions such as, how do we make sure machines don't perpetuate the bias that plague our society? Can we find ways to create intelligent, socially responsible machines? And can these AI machines reach people in underserved communities and emerging economies? Places not like the US, though. We might be moving in that direction. So I'm certain that IBM has been thinking about this. They're kind of at the forefront of all of this. And from each of your vantage points, I know you work internationally, and you also are working internationally. How do we address these challenges? It's going to be pervasive from what we hear.
Well, we created, we were part of forming that alliance, the Open AI Alliance with Apple and Google and Microsoft, et cetera. And I think those folks are really tackling those issues head on. I have not had any exposure to that yet, so I'm looking forward to see what they come up with. But I know what I'm thinking about as far as I don't know if I would go so far as to say ethics, but about what it means to think about it from an augmented perspective. It's not there to replace, it's there to add to what it is that we have as our own expertise, not to remove it. And so I think by developing these design principles for us to follow, it is about intentionally keeping the user in the mix the entire time, the expert in the mix the entire time.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because we often think about, how can we try or test something out in these emerging markets that wouldn't be possible here because there aren't regulations and so forth that'll hamper. And I think it's something we have to be conscious of because, if we don't pay attention to how we are using these tools in an ethically and responsible way, we do have a chance to make mistakes that we have made in the past. And I always the slide at the end of my presentation was looking at Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. They both use data to make decisions. Jane had her spreadsheets of numbers and people who believed in certain things. She had a lot of data, a lot of people who signed up. And Robert Moses had another data set that was based on an efficiency. Each one of them had their perspective that they were trying to push. And I think that's something that we have to remember with data is that we are also biased in the way that we present and analyze it. And how to make sure you're balanced, I think, is one of the hardest questions because we're always going to be biased. And the computer is reflective of us, and it will also be biased. So it's a hard question, I think. I say that companies really need to work with people on the ground, but they have their own bias, so it's not always the answer, right?
So I think we're ready to open up to the audience. Do we have a mic? Oh, we're going to take my mic.
Sorry. So are there any questions? Okay, I'll be right over. If you wouldn't mind standing.
Yeah, sure. That was awesome, guys. Thank you so much. I think my question is specifically, at least, well, maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm sure everyone has much cooler insights than I do. But for the gentleman from IBM, when you're thinking about conversational augmented intelligence or artificial intelligence, just to kind of drill into what you were talking about, it seems like there's kind of two sides to the building of the relationship, right? So one is what you said, where you don't want it to screw up and people say, I don't like this, I don't trust this anymore. But that seems to apply from a design standpoint mostly to bots that would occupy a very specific time frame, like the H&R Block bot, where I'm using it because I'm doing my taxes and it works for me, and then I don't talk to it again until the next year, ostensibly. But for bots, or I'm using bots as an example, but for artificial intelligence, it's going to have a more prolonged, occupy a more prolonged space in my life. It seems like there has to be not only designed to make me not want to run away from it or hide from it on the playground as you would with a friend you don't like, but there has to be kind of an aha moment where I'm where a user is actively impressed, much like they would have to be actively impressed with other types of technology. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts or anybody's thoughts on how you think about kind of the flip side of building that relationship for a more long-term sustainable relationship.
I think primarily it's about designing in a humility into the interaction itself, in that if you can train the conversational system to fail with grace, to be able to articulate maybe why it couldn't answer the question that you were asking is a critical moment, because we tend to forgive fairly easily. And if we understand that there is a limit, and that I think in traditional systems and a lot of the stuff we use today, we hit that failure point, and we know that that failure point is going to exist every single time after it, until there's a system update, or we read a news article that tells us that our AI assistant in our pocket's been updated. I think the difference is, as we start to build relationships with these systems, that we understand that as we grow and learn with them, that they're going to grow and learn with us. So it's about, again, it's the humility. It's not, haha, you don't know what this is and I do, or vice versa, but that there's a willingness to say that it's wrong or that it doesn't necessarily know, and that the end user has the ability to give that back in the same way.
Hi. So we're talking about open source data, giving the community access to data. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what data it might not be a good idea to share with the community.
I think typically in local governments, if you were to look at the open data portal, there's all really amazing stuff in there that you've never seen before. For example, in San Francisco, my favorite data set is the types of trees that are planted on which blocks on a weekly basis by the Public Works. But what you'll notice is that most times crime data and police data are heavily scrutinized, and so you'll see that there's redactions happening a lot. And I think identity around some of that police data should obviously be a little bit sensitive. Obviously, there's a balance to be struck whether or not you think the police is hiding something. Maybe you do want access to that data, but I think it really depends on whose data is it. I think that's how one should ethically think about it. Is it your data or is it the city's data?
Okay. I'll try to do. Hello, I'm Robert. What can cities and communities do to facilitate infrastructure for data, especially looking at like smaller communities throughout the U.S., like smaller cities, towns, counties, things like that?
Right. So how can they build their data?
How can they help supply data to you guys? Like we have our Do It in New York City,
Yeah.
but like at a national level, a lot of smaller communities, a town of 20,000 in Iowa has different needs than a city like New York City. And like, how can these resources be beneficial to them?
Right. I mean, yeah. Do you want? Yeah. I
you
mean, I
first.
could. I mean, what? I mean, many of those. I'll just briefly talk, and then I'm sure Tiffany has more to say about this than I do. But many of these cities, they have their states provide them with the data set, so the infrastructure funding comes from. So, like for example, Massachusetts. There's so many small little towns, and they don't have the capacity to build the data. So Massachusetts has created a data center for the whole state, which is incredible and has parcel data for the whole entire state. And so, but I think what I do want to say is that moving forward, we need to make sure those kinds of infrastructures are set in place. For example, this morning, the White House just took off its open data, all of its open data today. And it was a lot of local data, so I think one thing we need to really think about is what is open data? Is it open always? I think like what we need to work on next is not how to generate it, because there is a lot, but how to save it.
Yeah, I love the question about small under-resourced cities, because I can actually point to a lot of examples where many of them are doing a lot. Like I know Asheville in North Carolina has a really robust GIS and open data team, and what they do is they just default to open. So instead of like having it on some on-premises server that's like hidden away, every single time there's a new geospatial data set, they'll just put it on their website, and you don't need a fancy, shiny open data portal that costs many, many thousands of dollars like a big state needs. But you can literally just put it on your city website and see who clicks on it and see who does something cool with it. And as long as you provide it in a computer readable format like a CSV and not like a PDF, you'll probably be surprised, even in your small under-resourced city, what value someone might derive from it.
Sarah, you mentioned at the beginning that this class or seminar that you had this morning, you were looking at data in the election. Can you talk a little bit more about what you discovered? I'll give you your mic back.
Let's see. Wow, I'll summarize it in a minute, maybe or two. I think one of the things that I think is really important is we have a lot of questions about the election. Why did we wake up every morning and see this New York Times statistic that said Hillary was going to win? And I think what's interesting is, the polling that we have, the polling data that we have right now is was not refined enough to actually you can make an estimate, and people did make those estimates. But for example, like in Pennsylvania, they weren't actually calling Pennsylvania. They were, they were using statewide polls and then kind of matching it up with voter trends in that state. So I think one of the things that was happening in the election is that there were kind of mixed polls. Some states were getting polls, some weren't, and then we're using that data to kind of make a statement about the overall election. And so I think that's some of the project. And then there's, other kinds of issues. But one of the things that we're trying to do in the class is kind of understand what happened, but also to how to use data to impact kind of policies that we want to see in the future. So what policies do we think are important that we want to visualize and communicate to Congress as a kind of important impact, but do that vis-a-vis election results, right? So you're in Pennsylvania, you voted this way, you switched this way because you're concerned about something. And so how can we look at those switches and then look at particular policy and visualize those to have an impact? But I think one of the things that's really interesting is that there were other sites. I think there were a lot of sites that were putting them more at an even ranking. I think some of the CNN data often, there were other data sites other than the New York Times that had a much closer race. And I think the visuals had a big impact in what we thought was going to happen. And so if you're a reader of the New York Times and you woke up every morning and you saw that 95 to 10%, versus like if you're a reader of the New York Times, or CNN or Fox News, I think your impression of what was going to happen in the election was very different based on these kind of different visualizations that weren't inaccurate. They were based on polling data that maybe was not good. That's the best way to put it.
Do we have time for one more question?
As a follow-on to that, and in light of what happened at Open Data in the White House.gov today, or 2 weeks ago, whenever it happened, one of the things that occurs to me is that you've talked about how analysis can be biased, but how do we ensure that the provenance of the data itself is pure? One of the things that occurs to me is that when the data goes back up in the next administration, or if Trump puts it back up, how do we know that it's actually the same data that was there to begin with, for instance?
Wow, that's a hard question. We have something called the Federal Geographic Data Committee, and this is a committee that creates standards for how geographic data is distributed by the federal government. And so I would hope that we would keep those standards. And one of the things that we're talking about in my class is that we're starting to see the data come down. Clinton was an open data president. We often think of Obama as the first open data president. Actually, Clinton was the first open data president. He created the Federal Geographic Data Committee. He created this policy that made it, and I think an administration has changed the way that they view data, and we're seeing that change. I don't think it's just a Trump versus Obama. It was a Clinton versus Bush change as well. I think Republicans don't believe in open data as much as Democrats for a number of different reasons. So I think sometimes, we want to attribute it to Trump. But in this case, I think it's about a general policy of the government being too big and this data being too intrusive, which I think is an interesting thing to think about.
I guess more practically, I know there's a number of folks on the internet who have actually gone and downloaded that, 20 gigabyte set of data files, and so now it exists on someone's computer somewhere. So I guess practically, if they were ever to put it up, we could run like a massive diff and analyze whether or not it changed. Hopefully it won't. But yes, it's really disheartening to see. But I think we'll have to fight for it.
Yeah, I think this is save the data moment.
That's it. It's 8 o'clock. So thank you all. Thank you all. Wonderful conversation.